My approach with culture and leadership development is, as I mentioned, I look at everything from this perspective of how do we find flow and as an organization, as leaders, and among our teams, and as individuals in our lives. So I think of flow as really this wholesome experience of being totally engaged in what we're doing, where we feel challenged, we feel empowered, we feel like we're making a difference. And that feeling that we get is really what leads us to be our best selves in whatever domain we're in, whatever field we're in.
And welcome back to Thank You for Your Attention. I'm Jason Beck. In this episode, I sit down with Matt Dubin. Matt is the founder and principal of Dubin Consulting Group. He's a culture and leadership development expert committed to helping organizations maximize their potential and cultivate an environment where people see their jobs as more than work. I love that stuff. Matt completed his PhD in positive organizational psychology at Claremont Graduate University underneath Dr. Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, a legendary professor. Check out the book Flow. It'll do you good. He's worked with startups, Fortune 500, 100 companies, tons of industries, tech, professional sports, entertainment, advertising, you name it. He's worked internally for a company and he now has his external consulting group. So we talk about that a little bit, the shifts in that, the differences, and we talk about effective organizations, effective teams, leadership, all about the board from a sense of how to improve organizations, but also about the behind the scenes work, which is kind of cool for us. So enjoyed this episode a lot. And again, like, share with anyone who you think would be interested in it, and sit back and enjoy. Thanks. And as always, we're sponsored by Larry H. Parker. That's Southern California's #1 automobile accident law firm. They've been successful in 95% of their cases. They'll fight for you.
We'll fight for you.
Hablamos español.
Let's do it.
Thank you so much for jumping on and be able to dive deeper about what you do, how you do it. I'm interested in your work. First off, it seems like you have a lot of things going on, right? You have your consulting company, Dubin Consulting. You also have Human Advantage. I saw you have that Start Local project. How do you balance all these different areas? How do you manage that?
Well, first of all, pleasure to be here. This one answer is I don't know how well I am balancing it all, but my thought process on it is coming from a background of studying flow, being able to fully invest our attention in one thing at a time. I really feel like in order to juggle a lot of things at once, I am not a believer in multitasking at all. And I think multitasking is the enemy of flow. And I didn't make that up, of course. It's self-explanatory that when we think about flow, it's all about investing your attention on a single endeavor. And so when I am working on one thing, I am fully in that one thing. And then when I shift gears, I fully shift gears to the other thing. So I really try to be mindful about, okay, if today I'm focusing on my consulting business for the next 4 to 5 hours, I'm going to get this thing done by 2 o'clock today. This project's going to be done. This deliverable is going to be done. And then once I'm done, I completely put it to the side and I forget about it. Of course, emails will come in and sometimes you got to get to them, but I really try to be mindful about once I've done the thing I said I was going to do, I really shift 100% of my attention to something else. Because if I try to split my attention, then nothing gets done. And then this creates that chaos. And as Dr. Csikszentmihalyi would say, the psychic entropy of just a mental battle going on of trying to balance so many different things that we don't even know where we were trying to focus our attention in the first place because it's just become so chaotic. So that's kind of how I try to do it. I'm not saying I'm successful, but that's my approach.
So you mentioned this whole idea of shifting completely and forgetting about a prior project when you're finished with that. It kind of reminds me of turning the page after failing at something in sports. I know you're a huge basketball fan, right? You miss a big shot during basketball, you have to forget about it so that it doesn't interrupt the rest of your day. You can see that with work too. You lose something in email, you you have a failure possibly or success, you have to forget about it or turn the chapter. What's a strategy that you do to get that mental shift to something new and to forget it and move on?
Yeah, one of the things that I've been battling with is earlier in my career, I used to let things get to me very easily. Like if I had a business development call that I don't feel like I handled very well, or if I don't feel like I delivered a workshop that well, it would eat at me for a long time. And when the more practice I've gotten, and the more that I've just learned to let just knowing that there's going to be a next one and a next one and a next one, it allows me to be like, okay, not that they don't all have to be great. I know there's going to be another one. And I think too, because having I mentioned to you before we officially started, but that I have a 1-year-old baby, and having the baby and just feeling like there's not even time to focus too much on past failures, or you have to quickly be able to just like, oh, that didn't go so well, now I have to go take care of my baby. And so that's kind of like that's how it feels right now, is that I just don't even have time to focus on past failures or past or things that I didn't feel that good about like I used to, because it would almost be unfair to my family to be like, I can't watch the baby right now because I'm ruminating over something,
Yeah.
over a meeting that didn't go so well. So, but
So
as
the
far as the
strategy
action,
is to get a baby, and
the
then you
strategy
won't
is to
be
get a baby.
worrying about your failures so much. Okay.
That's why we had the baby, so I wouldn't worry as much about my failures. Yeah. So, but I think to be more like the actual strategy around it for me is when I don't do well on something, I try to think about, was there anything in my control there that could have made it better? So if I felt like I was fully prepared and maybe Zoom, for example, was choppy and my internet connection wasn't what it was and it kind of got me a little bit flustered, I try to let that go because technically it's not really something
Yeah.
I could have controlled that well. But if I felt like the topic that I was speaking on, I just didn't have a handle on it like I should have, I felt like that was more my fault. I could have handled it better. I could have prepared better. So I try to really think like, okay, was it in my control or outside of my control? If it's outside of my control, I'm like, nothing I could have done, move on. If there was anything in my control, then I'm like, that's the mental note I got to make for next time, is what that's the thing I will fix and actually change moving forward.
Yeah, I'm hearing this idea, the first part, which is like zooming out, seeing what is actually globally important in life and what we have to stress about and what we don't have to stress about. And then the second thing is this idea of control and assessing what do I actually have control over and taking hold of
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
And so, of the things that you do have control over in your day, your time, your energy, your attention that you actually do have control over, how do you set yourself up for success? I mean, how do you manage your tasks? Do you have a task list? Do you do the Google Calendar thing? What is your process for that?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I hate to-do lists. For any Myers-Briggs fans out there, I know there's a lot of controversy, but if you know the JP dichotomy, I'm like a strong P, meaning I'm extremely flexible and adaptable, and I like to popcorn from one thing to the next. And it's a very much don't try this at home sort of mentality. I don't like I am not the person to talk to like how to best organize your day and all of that. I do. So yes, of course, I have a calendar that I keep for meetings. But a thing I do a lot that does help me is I block off a lot of time on my calendar for not meetings, to
Hmm.
not have a meeting. So I will block off. First of all, I try not to ever schedule meetings on Fridays. That's like my day to try to really focus. And so, and if I know I have a deadline coming up, I'll be like, okay, Wednesday morning, blocking that off, no meetings. So my pet peeve as a project manager, as a calendar manager, is having scattered meetings. I hate scattered meetings. I hate a meeting at 9 and then a meeting at 12 and then a meeting at 3 and then a meeting at 5. Get all day, every day, give me 9, 10, and 11 and
Hmm.
12. get them all done in a chunk, and then give me the time in the afternoon. I Because to me, scattered meetings lends itself to that division of attention that makes it so hard to find flow. If I only have 45 minutes in between meetings to try to dive into something, it's not enough time to just like, once you end the meeting, you need a few minutes to like decompress and all that. Then once you think about what you need to do next and then get going on it, then your next meeting's in 10 minutes. And then it's like, oh, it kind of feels like I got nothing done. So I really try to stack my schedule that way, chunk the meetings together and then chunk the focus time to work on something together.
Which is funny because that doesn't matter for meetings per se. When you have meetings back to back to back, it's easier to step into the virtual room with someone and then step into a new room with someone and automatically be engaged. But to go into that independent focus time, it's really hard. It takes time to shift from meeting to then, okay, now I'm going to go and do this deliverable and work on this one project by myself.
Yeah. And I think like for me, I'm somewhat of an introvert, and um, as someone who's kind of obsessed with that idea of flow, I do prioritize my individual time probably more than I prioritize my meetings.
Hmm.
I think for other people, it would be the opposite. Like for people who really value collaboration, or if they're working with a team every day, like they might prioritize their meetings more than their individual time. So I think part of it is knowing what your personal priorities are, where you want to spend your attention, structuring your days that way. So for me, I really try to protect the individual time, but that might not be the case for everybody.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that because today was literally that day where I had sporadic meetings. And I went for a
Ah,
walk before we got together and I was like, man, what happened today? What happened?
yeah.
Why was it so difficult for me to get into workflow between these meetings? And I came to that conclusion. And it's the task switching of going back and forth and back and forth.
It's like almost, if we were talking about, you brought up sports, right? Like let's say we were watching a basketball game, and a player dribbled up the court, and then they just said like, you know what, let's finish this play in 15 minutes, and then you would take a break and then come back and like, where were we? Let's all start where we were before. It was just the
Mm-hmm.
way we structure our time as knowledge workers is very counterintuitive to productivity. Like when you're playing the piano, right? You wouldn't ever like play a third of a song and then like answer a couple emails and then play the second third of the song and then like do a text, and then you play the song, but that's
Yeah.
not how we work.
And
We
if we
don't like
did do
do
that,
the project.
we'd have to think about where am I at in that song, and you'd have to actually go from the start to finish, start to the very beginning, and think through it again. And that as kind of wasted time in a sense that if you went all the way through, you get into it, you get into the flow of it.
Exactly. So I really try to, in my business too, and for myself, like try to make these analogies of like, think about greatness in any domain. And then do we really approach our work that way? Do we approach our work like a pianist approaches playing a song, or a dancer does a routine, or an athlete approaches a game, or a rock climber climbs a mountain? No, we don't. I mean, some people do, but for the most part, our work is not structured to be that productive because it's so scattered and so incredibly like dominated by technological distraction.
Yeah, so chunking perhaps is the word
Yes,
to describe
exactly.
it, is chunking activities, and it doesn't have to be like even specific domains. You could have two meetings with very different people in different projects, but they're meetings back and forth people time versus
Yeah,
individual writing time.
exactly. Exactly. Chunking is the perfect word for it.
Yeah, oh, that's cool. So you were working at Fox before starting your consulting firm, right? And then you
Yeah.
transitioned into doing your own thing. What was that? What are the lessons you learned from as you transitioned from being part of an organization to then jumping into starting your own thing?
Yeah. There's a certain there's definitely a huge learning curve when you're only answering to yourself. At Fox, everything you're really, I don't want to say, I'm going to speak for myself. I often worked for the approval of my boss, or the approval of my boss's boss or the team I was working with. And it felt like my motivation wasn't always intrinsic. It was more based on getting the approval of other people.
Mhm.
And I never felt like I was really the decision maker. I mean, I was very early in my career, and I knew that whatever I did, there was sort of a buffer, like a soft landing pad that, like, if it wasn't good, someone else would say it wasn't good and they would fix it and then it would end up being good. And when you're on your own, the buck stops with you in every way. So it's just the content I would put together. There wasn't anybody that would look at it. I didn't know if it was good or not. And clients in the consulting world, you're not getting like performance reviews from them, or you're not really getting feedback from them. Your feedback comes in the form of, are they extending contracts and
Yeah.
continuing to work with you or not? And if they decide not to continue with you, they don't usually tell you why. Or they'll just like blame the budget, which is oftentimes can be the case. They just don't have
But it's
budget.
an easy out.
But yeah, it's an easy out. So it's not like I'm getting much feedback anymore. So I think the huge learning curve is answering to myself and then never ever getting feedback on anything. So, I do certain feedback surveys when I do certain workshops and trainings, and I get feedback that way. But it's not the same as when you
No.
work in-house
I've
and you're
done some feedback
constantly being evaluated.
surveys for training programs, and it's hard because people generally will say people are generally nice, and they just say,
Yeah,
"Oh yeah,
they're
I liked
nice.
it. I liked it. It was good. I'm looking for how to improve it." And so it is tough to get that critical eye.
Exactly. It's hard to get the critical eye. And I feel like um, the other, then there's definitely the imposter syndrome of what makes me uh, an expert in anything. Like, why should people listen to me
Mm.
about anything in life, but for my business, like, why should they listen to me about how to run their team or how to be a leader or how to find flow? Um, so that was something that I was working through for a few years, of like owning and being confident in my subject matter. And that comes with reps,
Mm.
just doing it again and again and again, and starting to get your chops around present my presentation style, delivering content, fine tuning what's working and what's not working, getting certain clients that boost your confidence. And so, um, but that was something in the beginning. I just felt like I was sort of faking it till I made it, fake it till I make it mentality, because I had never been a business owner and I was asking clients to pay me to do things for them that I had never done before. So it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. So looking at your LinkedIn bio, culture and leadership development expert, committed to blah, blah, blah. Well, I'll say in the beginning when I introduce you, but could you speak a little bit more about your niche, in terms of culture? And how
Yeah,
did you go about choosing your niche, which is often a difficult
that's
thing for people?
it's such a good question. And so my approach with culture and leadership development is, as I mentioned, I look at everything from this perspective of how do we find flow, and as an organization, as leaders, and among our teams, and as individuals in our lives. So I think of flow as really this wholesome experience of being totally engaged in what we're doing, where we feel challenged, we feel empowered, we feel like we're making a difference. And that feeling that we get is really what leads us to be our best selves in whatever domain we're in, whatever field we're in. So that's my approach, my overall approach. Do I always say this to clients? Not necessarily. Like some clients don't necessarily not understand that language of flow. So I might have to change it a little bit to talk more about peak performance or
Mm-hmm.
peak engagement and things like that. But it really means the same thing. And it was a bit of a learning experience for me to understand how to tweak my language for certain when I'm talking to certain companies based on what would most resonate with them, even though I knew that I was talking about the same thing. So, however, then from there, I started to develop a lot of different services that all go toward that same goal of helping organizations find creating a culture of flow. So whether it's doing certain people development workshops and open enrollment around delegating, empowering, feedback, coaching, emotional intelligence, or just really on the nose, like finding flow, or something more intensive, a leadership development program that you really like go in depth in these topics and a certain cohort goes through it together, or finding mentorship pairs for people to feel like they're having access to higher levels in the organization and starting to learn from them to start to get more challenged to get to where they want to go, or actually doing executive coaching. So I really kind of created this full service organizational development firm, all toward the ultimate goal of whatever you choose from this menu of services, the goal is to find more consistent and higher levels of flow. Um, I've had people tell me over the years that like you really want to focus on one thing, like you're a coach or you're a trainer or you're a assessment person, and
Mhm.
like I didn't end up taking that advice, because for me finding flow, I love the variety. I love having different projects, doing different things with different companies that are of different sizes and different industries and have different challenges. So that's what's working for me. And that's another thing that I think when you start to run your business, it really has to be such a personal decision of what you choose to how you choose to brand yourself and what niche you go after, because you'll get a lot of advice of people that the way that they did it, then want to tell you that's the way that you should do it. Some of it is good advice, but some of it is like you got to know when to throw it away and just follow your own gut instinct on it.
Yeah, to isolate on something and then to then branch off the many services. I like that path. I also like what you had to say about being able to translate some concept into many different languages. And as someone who goes from academia, a PhD student, and being basically for years and years being told, nope, what's the definition? And that's the only definition of motivation. It's the only definition of social support, right? And then they have to go off into the quote unquote real world and say, okay, how do you translate something like mindfulness, for instance, from my path into not a woo woo term, but say it as mental performance, or even describe it in terms of resilience or stress, which is resilience is a really hot topic right now. Now, it really takes like this Rosetta Stone ability to translate concepts into the other person's knowledge base, the other person's worldview.
Yeah, it really does. And I think that's it's part of our job as organizational psychologists of understanding to speak someone else's language, like in practicing what we preach in that way. And it's part of empathy too, really being able to
Mm.
step into their shoes and talk about what they care about. Um, so some companies they want mindfulness all the way, and that's what they use that language, and those are the people that you're like you want to really latch onto and
Yeah.
uh, work with them as much as possible. But then others it'll be like they care about it deep down, but it's just not the language they're using.
Hmm.
You know? And
Hmm.
and I think if we try to keep ramming it down and be like mindfulness, 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 and it's not resonating, then that's on us.
Yeah. I think it brings a point about personality assessments that you mentioned earlier that it is helpful to know our own and others. I'm a J. So you mentioned you're a P, right? So I'm an INTJ on the Myers-Briggs, which I'm going
Ah,
to have a very different approach to work. And so if you knew that as a consultant going in, then you could help me figure out how to structure my day even more intensely to utilize my tasks list system at ease versus someone who may be a P who's a little bit different at that. Yeah.
yeah, and like we could talk, and like let's say we were colleagues, like there's a lot of ways that we would probably benefit each other so much and ways we would frustrate each other, and that's teams. Every team has that. So how do we really bridge that gap of like taking advantage of each other's strengths and understanding the frustrations we're having with each other, but not letting it get in the way of us working well
Yeah.
together?
And accepting frustrations. There's this utopian attitude
Yeah.
sometimes with teams that you can't ever, like, can we ever not have frustrations? It's like, that's not possible. People are going to have tension. It's how much can we accept it and
Yeah.
utilize it?
Yeah. And like if we talk about something like group flow, finding flow in teams, that tension can be really the key, the essence of having the most successful team is having like how to bridge creative differences to create something better than either of you might have done on your own.
Is that why we see these teams like the Lakers with Shaq and Kobe that have such intense rivalries within the team? And almost it seems like post hoc that they wanted to rip each other's guts out, but then they go off and succeed in these great realms. Is it because of that tension is almost as needed as their harmony?
I think so. I think for certain personalities, the tension is what drives greatness, because it's such a they're such competitors that having an environment that is too harmonious is not it's not what challenging for them. It's not what gets them going. It's not what motivates them. So they want to feel like they are um, pushing each other and understanding that, like, yes, maybe this is your team, but I'm going to show you who's the best. So it's this competitive back and forth of like, I'm actually going to show the world that I'm the best and better than you, even though that you're on my team. So they end up both being better than they would have been because they're trying
Mm.
to prove that they're better than the other. And like, I think the most classic example ever of that is John Lennon and Paul McCartney of the Beatles. So it's the same thing, that what they achieved together was better than what they could achieve on their own, partly because they were always trying to one up each other.
Hmm. It's funny in the house I'm at right now, I living with other PhD students and other people in the same realm of consultants in this area. We've have a new system down this last 2 weeks we've been practicing. So we have a whiteboard in our co-working space. And have you heard of Pomodoros?
Yes.
Yeah. So a Pomodoro, for those who don't know, is a 25-minute deep work session where you're supposed to be intensely focused for 25 minutes. Don't go on Instagram, don't check anything else, right? Within that amount of time. And then you're supposed to take a 5-minute break afterwards. And then you can start another Pomodoro. Well, we're tallying each Pomodoro and we're seeing in the week who can do the most Pomodoros. But as a house, we're all trying to get to 100 Pomodoros together. So we had this like team goal of like, okay, who's going to carry the boat so that we get to 100? But also we're going to see who can get the most Pomodoros in a week. And I think it's definitely pushing me because I'm like, 8 p.m. rolls around and I see someone in the workroom like, hey, what, are you trying to get a palm in right now? What's going on over here?
You got to get those palms in. It's like the productivity version of getting your steps in.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
hold up. Okay, you're trying to do your palm. I guess I could prep for my tomorrow day by just doing a quick palm session, I
Yeah,
guess.
just quick palm. Yeah, I love it. I love it. So yes, I think that, yeah, you're pushing each other. It's friendly competition. And I think like for some of these unbelievably like peak performers in their field, there's like a somewhat psychoticness
Yeah.
to it
Yeah.
that
Michael
I
Jordan
yeah.
making up personal reasons.
Yeah. So it's like that the palm thing you're doing times 1,000 of like so
This is
yeah,
not
I think that,
personal. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. How dare you do another palm at
Yeah. Oh,
11 at
this is not
night?
personal. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're messing with me. You mentioned a
Yeah.
couple of like different organizational development initiatives, personality assessments, team trainings, leadership, blah, blah, like a lot of different strategies. And I'm sure it depends upon which company you're going to and which one you choose and which one do they want. What's a go-to thing that's kind of fresh on your mind or what has your attention right now that you're working with that you're really into recently? One of those strategies.
Um, so my ultimate engagement, and the one that I get most excited about, is when I basically become like I'm like a somewhat in-house their L&D person, like fractional, where I am relied upon to create and develop and facilitate all of their learning and development initiatives. So they've never done it before. They bring me in, and then I really start from scratch, where I do a lot of discovery and I talk to department heads and individual contributors and managers, directors, VPs, assistants, coordinator. I talk to everybody, and I just love that. I love listening to people, hearing what their experiences are like, and really trying to create the most customized list of offerings we can. So I'll do that, and then I'll do a culture climate survey. Like, what's the state of the union of this place? What do we
Mm-hmm.
like about working here? What do we feel like could be better? I try to make my approach, in whether it's a survey or in these interviews, like extremely conversational, extremely informal. We're all people, and I just always want to approach everything with, like, I don't want people to see me as a consultant, because then their guard comes up and it's like, who's this consultant? I don't want to be seen as that. And especially because I'm a boutique firm, like, I'm not this giant, I'm not like a huge big five firm that's coming in,
Yet.
that's not what I'm yeah, you're right. You're right. So
Yeah.
a few more palms and I'll get there.
Few more palms, man. You'll get
Yeah.
there.
And
No.
so I want them to see me as truly someone there to support them. And then, so that once I do that discovery, then I'll really start to think about, like, okay, which teams do I think need to go through, like, maybe a big picture strategy session, because they don't know where they're going over the next 1, 2, 3 years, and it would be helpful for them. Or do I feel like there is a overall issue around people not feeling comfortable giving critical feedback, or understand how to give conduct coaching conversations, and maybe I do a leadership intensive for certain managers. Um, or do I feel like there's certain department heads that I just keep hearing that there's some issues with, and then maybe I'll do some coaching with them, and or maybe they're just new in their job and they want to get to the next level, or they're just green right now, and it would be helpful for them to do some work. So then I really do a lot of customized offerings. So, like, thinking about, okay, I want to do this with marketing, and I don't want to do this with accounting, and I want to do this with legal, or it just kind of depends on what's going on with the company. And then I'll think, like, okay, what do I want to do with everybody? And I think that these topics, and I'll do some of, like, the most pertinent topics, like how to be at your most productive when working virtually, and kind of the stuff that's on everybody's mind. I'll kind of do that lane separate, and then have all these customized things going on as well. And as I mentioned before, it creates this really holistic, but a lot of variety, and every team is going through their own, but something that really works for them. And that's my ideal engagement. So I try to have a few of those going at a time. And that's what really excites me the most about my business. Of course, I'll do ad hoc things here and there, but it's not my favorite to go into a company, do a 2 hour thing, and then be like, all right, maybe you learned a thing or two, and now I'll never see you again.
Yeah, like an
Um,
explorer of sorts, kind of like you're going in with your Batman utility belt.
yeah,
I'm really
exactly.
imagining an explorer. Yeah.
Yeah. To me, it's sort of the best of both worlds, of, like, being on my own, but sort of getting the camaraderie of being in house and getting to really know an organization. Um, so that's what I go for. But again, I think it suits my personality, because I can I don't mind having a lot of things going at once, as far as, like, different types of offerings and companies and that. But some people, I think, that I've talked to wouldn't want to do it that way. They really
Yeah.
prefer just having a more specific lane of what they offer.
Mhm. That's good to know. Yeah. So, as we're approaching the wrap up here, I have a few more questions. One
Of
is,
course.
I'm at the dissertation proposal stage, as I mentioned, nearing somewhat the end, question mark. Seeing the light, I guess I can kind of see the light. So, and I recently took a sabbatical from the prior consulting work that I was on so I could focus on it. So what kind of advice do you have for me, or for, I guess, anyone in a situation where they're trying to settle in and take advantage of time, if they're in a PhD phase? What advice do you have for me in my stage right now as I'm moving forward with beginning to close the chapter? We're getting there. Of course, there's data collection and all that stuff.
Yeah, I would say, this is gonna sound worthless, but I don't want, just finish, 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 finish. Because if the longer you prolong that process, no matter how many cool things come up in the meantime, it's always there.
Yeah.
And for me, it was always there. Like, no matter what I was doing on the side, and no matter how excited I was about it, it was just this gnawing thing of, like, I haven't finished school. I still need to write that paragraph. I still need to do that section. I still need to do this, or I still need to finish my IRB. And it really kind of kept me from diving in full fledged to anything, because I knew I needed to devote more time to it. And it's like, as I said in the beginning of the conversation, what's in my control? There was always more I could be doing for school that I wasn't doing. I knew it was in my control just to do it, even if I didn't
Mhm.
necessarily want to. Because the dissertation, it's such a long, arduous process sometimes. And it's something that as our culture becomes doing things quicker and we're used to things like really quick reinforcement and we want a meal, we can just do Postmates or Uber Eats or whatever, or it just in a few clicks it's there. Dissertation, it's you're diving in so deep on one topic and you spend years on it, and it's becoming harder for our minds to be able to like enter that type of mindset to do something like that. um, so it can be really easy to put off to do something that provides more short-term gratification.
Yeah.
Um, but as someone who it did take me a long, long time, the short-term gratification was never worth prolonging that process for. So I would say try to sacrifice some short-term wins to do that to focus on that long-term
Yeah.
goal, even though it won't feel good in the moment.
I always wonder this too with people who graduate. Were you like such relieved that you're like, all right, I'm never going to be putting myself into a hole like that again? Or were you just like, all right, time to just invest my time into another huge long-term project? Right? The kind of person that goes to PhD and accepts that, is that a personality trait that they need to have that thing in their life that takes a long time to do?
I think there is something to that. You know what? I felt relief when I finished, but there was also a sense of like this thing that had given me so much purpose and reason to so much like took up so much of my thoughts and time, and it was just over. And it felt very weird of like, so that was like, now what?
Mm,
It was such a big part of my identity, and um, trying to completely shift gears away from being a student into being a business owner or working somewhere, I think is it's harder than I thought it was going to be. It was hard for me to just kind of shut that part of my life off and really become in jump into the professional world, um, and where everything's about the bottom line and no people aren't as interested in just talking about ideas for the sake of it.
yeah.
um, and I miss it. I do miss it now. I mean, it took me. I would say the first year I didn't miss it because I was just tired. But now I really miss some of the ways we used to operate as students, where there was the ideas were worth exploring just because they were very interesting and
Yeah.
because it made a difference in people's lives. It wasn't all about how do we get this company more money, um, which I try not to get too. I still try to focus on other things, but at the end of the day, that's what businesses care about the most, and it's the world we're in. So um, they're just yeah. So I would say yes, finish, but try to maintain some of that wonder in your next endeavor that you're getting as a student, even if you're frustrated with some of the parts of being a student right now.
Mhm.
Um, I don't. I try not to just have everything be about the consulting firm. I still do. Like, for example, I just wrote a chapter for the positive organizational interventions book, and
Oh,
to kind
cool.
of get, yeah, it's a little plug
Oh,
for
the one
myself
with
right there.
is that the one with Donaldson?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and Chris Chen?
yeah. So I
Yeah,
have
yeah.
a flow chapter in there. So I try to still do some stuff like that.
Oh,
It's not
good.
only client work.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the attention that you bring to the client work is one that has that wonder because you spent all those years arguing about construct validity. There we go. Got to get a
Yeah.
jargon word every time, every podcast, no matter what, even if no one knows what that is.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we got that word in there, because otherwise we would have had to re-record this whole thing.
Oh, yeah, yeah, which yeah, that would not be good. Well,
Yeah.
Matt, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and effort in here to have a little chat and learn about what you do. It sounds like you're doing really cool work and you have fully transitioned into running a really successful consulting firm and doing a lot of cool things. I like that a lot.
Thank you so much, Jason. And yeah, you're just you're on that same path, and you're exactly where I was a few years ago. So just keep it up, man. And this podcast is amazing, and just really such a pleasure to chat with you.
Cool. Thanks, Matt.